Hey, folks! Welcome to episode 48 of Funny Books Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. I am your host, James Ferguson. Hey, quick sidebar, did you guys know that I hosted a radio show in college? You know what it was called? Too Fast, Too Ferguson. No joke. Anyway, this week's guest is Allison O'Toole, the editor of Wayward Sisters, an upcoming anthology featuring stories about women and non-binary monsters by women and non-binary creators. Allison successfully funded the book through Kickstarter, nearly doubling the fundraising goal. She even has a story in the book too. Wayward Sisters is currently available for pre-order at waywardsistersanthology.com. You can also see the full listing of all 25 stories included in the anthology there. You can find it on Twitter at WS Anthology, and Allison can be found online on Twitter at Allison M. O'Toole. That's Allison with 2 L's. In other news, I completely forgot to mention this last week, but I wrote up my list of the top 10 horror comics of 2017 for Horror Talk. There were a lot of great titles to choose from, so it was tough to narrow it down, but I'm super happy with this list. You can check it out under the features section on HorrorTalk.com. That is it for the news and updates this week. Now, let's get right into this week's episode of Funny Book Splatter with my guest, Allison O'Toole.
So, the way I like to start the show now, I realized I needed some structure to it, and the way I do that now is by asking the creator to kind of pitch your book. If you're on the convention floor and someone's walking by and you got a minute or two with them, how would you pitch Wayward Sisters?
Are we recording now?
Yes. Yeah.
Or, okay, sorry.
Jumping right
Great.
in.
All right.
I should be a lot more clearer from that, because I get that question a lot, and I'm just like, no, we're good. Just.
Yeah, I thought
talking.
that was set up. All right. So, Wayward Sisters is a collection of stories by women and non-binary creators telling stories about women and non-binary monsters. Is my really concise elevator pitch.
No, that is. You'd be surprised how little elevator pitches I get sometimes. So that's very concise. It's to the point. That's perfect.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things I was curious about is there is you delve into monsters and you deal with a lot of horror stuff within Wayward Sisters. Why horror to kind of tackle like that particular theme?
So I think we have, in terms of technical genre, there's actually a pretty broad range in the collection. So we do definitely have some horror stories, but we've also got some that more are kind of comedic or more romantic or more fantasy and things like that. I am a big horror fan, but I also love monsters just in any genre and any context. And I am interested in monsters because I think they're really ripe for metaphor. I think there's a lot you can do to explore things that are taboo or things that are like aspects of one's identity that are seen as monstrous, which is why I wanted to limit this to only creators that identify as women or non-binary telling the stories as well, so that they can kind of look at themselves and look at how society perceives them and how they feel perceived. And I think that monsters have a lot of opportunity to tell stories like that and kind of look at those things because, what is a monster other than something that's seen as like outside the norm, you know? I also just think monsters are fun and they can have like really cool designs and really cool ideas, and it was just, you're kind of adding that speculative fiction side to a lot of stories about day-to-day tribulations at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I misspoke. I look at it like when you hear the word monster, especially when you're dealing with anything supernatural or anything related, like I still put it under the horror umbrella. So
100%. Yeah, I think I just I don't want to give listeners, I guess, the wrong impression. Like, I've been calling it a horror book, that's why I wanted to talk about it with you on Horror Talk. But we were conscious of the fact that there are a lot of people that might be interested in monster stories that aren't necessarily into the horror genre, and I want people to, I guess, know what they're getting from the book.
Well, and that's one of the beauties of the anthology, is that you could with something like this, you can have a little bit of everything. You can have more comedic takes, you could have more horror takes, you can have everything in between. And that's also one of the benefits of the horror genre, is because it all still could be classified as horror, even if it is funny. Like Shaun of the Dead is one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, yeah, it's a straight up comedy, but it's also still a horror movie dealing with zombies and all this other stuff.
Yeah, American Werewolf in London
Yes.
is one of my faves too, and I think it walks a similar line. I think there's a lot of similarity between comedy and horror, specifically in terms of the way that they're kind of set up to build tension, and then you get a punchline. You know, I think that they're two genres that meld really well together. But I think certainly you can mix horror elements into other genres and mix other elements from other genres into horror as well.
Yeah, and I think both can be difficult to do well in the comic book medium, because there's so much out of the creator's control. Whereas like you can't like do a setup punchline. Like you can't control that timing and how quickly a reader is going through something. So I'm always amazed by how different creators kind of come at both scares and laughs in a story, because it's always a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, the artist, I think it comes down to their work a lot of the time, because you can control pacing with like things like panel size and gutter size and like the number of panels you're using for a certain moment. You can definitely draw a moment out or make it really quick. I think like that's definitely something you can be conscious about. But I agree, something like horror can be really tough because it has to be so mood based, and it relies so heavily on your artist really nailing, everything from like the amount of black they're using to the color palette and everything. So I think horror in particular can be really tough to nail in comics, but I also think that the medium has a lot to offer the horror genre when you look at, like anything from Alan Moore's Swamp Thing to like Harrow County that's coming out right now.
Yes.
Like there's a really broad range of things you can do with the genre, and as you say, like there's a lot of artists tackling it in a lot of really different ways. But I think it's exciting when there's like a new really good horror comic that comes out, because it feels like it's still kind of on the fringes, which is weird to me.
Yeah, it's well, like the comic medium in general is still on the fringes, unfortunately. Despite tearing up the box office, it's still something that they're like, wait, they still make these. It's
the fringe of the fringe.
Yeah, but yeah, there's been this like really great kind of renaissance for horror comics over the past like 10 years or so, I'd say, where every publisher is playing in that sandbox to some extent. And there's been a lot, like especially with things like Image and some of the stuff coming out of like Dynamite, and even like the smaller publishers like Boom or Comics Tribe and stuff, like a lot of really cool stuff that's coming in that's all genre stuff that's heavily horror influenced, and you can kind of like see it all kind of like bubble up, and it's like, oh, this is really good. So I just submitted my my top 10 list for the year for horror comics, and I'm like, this is it. Every year I've looked back like in my time hop thing of like my tweets and stuff over the past years, and every year there's a tweet of, man, this is really hard to put together this year, because it's always really hard to like put all those and make a kind of best of list, because of just how much is coming out now that is fitting for this genre.
Yeah, definitely. It's there's, as you say, like there are so many, especially once you start looking outside of the major publishers, there's so much that's happening in comics and in horror comics. It's overwhelming. I thought every year when those lists starts coming out, I'm like, oh wow, I've read 3 things on this list.
Yeah, it's funny, like whenever best of list comes out, I recognize that like I'm only exposed to like a chunk of the comic book industry, especially when you get into more of like the I don't want to call it mainstream, but like your books that are like what's her name, the woman who makes Raina Telgemeier. Yeah, like that's completely out of my wheelhouse, but like she's like one of the biggest creators in the industry right now, like selling way more than like your Spider-Man and Batman and stuff like that, and it's like and has every right to be on best of lists. And then I'm like, man, like how do I get into that, get into that feed so I'm more exposed to more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to come back to Wayward Sisters, but I know you mentioned some current books like Harrow County and stuff. Or what are you reading now that's like really popping out at you that like, oh, this is like really cool, this is something that they're doing it well?
I wish that I could tell you that. I'm since I am a comic editor, I spend all day reading comics and looking at comics and dissecting comics, and I haven't been reading as many of the ones that are like being published right now. So there's some that I want to read, but I'm really behind on pretty much everything. Like one that I loved because I read the first few issues and then completely dropped was like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you haven't really missed much because their publishing schedule has been kind of messed up.
Which is why I fell off. But I feel like the's been more than the 3 issues that I read.
Yeah, but I think
like 2 years ago.
I think they're up to like 8 though in the amount of the time that you've departed. That's what I'm getting
That's
at.
true.
Like,
well, it was a really good book when it was coming out.
And they're making that into a TV show now.
So I'm hearing more about it, and I'm going, oh, that's right. I fell behind on this.
It's a good thing and a bad thing because I feel like now we're never going to get that comic. So
I
want that to come back in such a big way, but hopefully.
Yeah, it was really good. I'm reading a lot of like web comics that are kind of horror flavored though. Like I know you had Tess Stone on, like Not Drunk Enough is a fantastic web comic, and Barbarous by Anant Hirsch and Yuka Ota. Excuse me. But like Wildlife is really good. There was one called Glamour, stopped updating, that I loved and I was really sad. But Ava's Demon is really good. There are so many good horror flavor webcomics right now that I'm reading, and I'm like, obviously I'm drawing a blank because I'm getting overwhelmed by like the 70 that I'm following, but that's kind of where my reading is right now. Hit me up on Twitter, I'll give you a list. But I think that space is really exciting for horror comics right now, and it feels a lot more like manageable because I can just kind of read the 1 or 2 pages that are updated per comic per week, and some, you kind of wait and you're like, oh, there's like 10 pages now. You kind of binge through them.
Yeah, I've gone
Strange Tales of Oscar Zahn is another fun one that's horror-y. It feels Hellboy-ish a little bit. It's a lot of fun. But I'm a lot more caught up with web comics at the moment than I am with traditionally published ones, which is terrible to say, but
no, look,
I never leave my house. I don't go to the comic book.
You're making comics, so like that's the thing. Like I every other creator I see, like they get a chance to, ingest only so much because it's like, one, you don't want to influence your own work, I'm sure, and two, it's like, well, you're spending all this time making it, and it's like that takes time and energy, and it's like, and if you're spending that, you're an editor, so you're going to be spending all this time reading them, and it's like you just want to get out and do anything else. Like I'm sure like there are times you get home and you're just like, man, the last thing I want to see is a comic book right now. So,
yeah, like I still get excited about the medium, but yeah, when I sit down to read for pleasure, I tend to pick up, like I'm back on novels because for a few years I was sort of reading comics more exclusively, so now I'm back on like prose fiction and like podcasts and stuff like that. So I guess I should be plugging, I also edit for Chapter House Comics, and we have a book called Phantoma that's horror flavored, and it's written by Ray Fox with art by Sue Lee, and amazing covers by Jabril Morissette Fan. That's a horror book that's a lot of fun, and we're working on the 2nd season right now, and it's looking really good, and I hope people will be really excited about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, we should definitely talk about that too. It's the editing. How is the editing life when it comes to something like edit? I mean, did you edit the entire anthology for Wayward Sisters?
I have an assistant editor, M. Blankier, who helps out. So we tend to be like floating. Like it'll be a case of, okay, I've looked at this story's lettering 6 times. Can you just have a look as a second set of eyes? We'll flip stories back and forth that way. But editing is a lot of project management. Like there's definitely the aspect that's, what you think of, where you're checking the story and checking the spelling and looking at the art and all that stuff. But a lot of it is just chasing after people and making sure that they're submitting things to you when they're supposed to, and yelling at them if they don't. That kind of stuff.
It has to be. I mean, you have 25 different stories in this book, right? So like that's you're dealing with at least 25 creators. And that's assuming
around 40.
Yeah, that's assuming it's someone that's doing everything. But yes, you have 40 different creators that you're trying to all juggle. Like it's like herding cats, I imagine, at times of just trying to get everything in one spot.
Yeah, editing is a lot like herding cats. It's tough because you're working with a bunch of, and this goes for anthologies or for the mainstream stuff, to be honest, with what I'm doing for Chapter House, which is more superheroes. You have creators who are all, artistic personalities, and everyone, if they're either freelance and balancing this with a bunch of other projects, or they are doing this, on the side, especially with the anthologies. It's rare that you're working with people for whom comics is their full-time job, which means that they have other priorities and stuff, and it's easy sometimes for things to fall behind or slip through, and then you're kind of frantically trying to fix things later,
Yeah.
But it's tough, yeah. And when you're managing that many people, even on a superhero book, you can be managing a team of like 5 to 7 people sometimes, depending on how the work is broken down. And so, yeah, a lot of it's kind of managing personalities and figuring out how to communicate with different people based on what gets work from them, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy doing it. But yeah, it comes with its share of difficulties, like anything does.
Now, how did this particular project come about? Because you have a specific kind of theme involved in terms of the type of creators you wanted, the type of stories that you're looking for. So, and again, also setting a goal. Well, I don't know if this was a goal, but you have 25 stories all together in the book. How did you get started with putting this together?
So really it kind of started when I was working on the Toronto Comics anthology, which is also published by TO Comics Press. We, a couple years ago, Stephen Andrews, the lead editor and the publisher of Toronto Comics, was looking for additional editorial support for Volume 3 of the Toronto Comics anthology. And so we worked together on Volume 3 and Volume 4, Young at Heart. And from there, Stephen decided that he wanted to expand as a publisher and try publishing some other things aside from like the flagship series. And since we've been working together, he actually pitched me on doing just a women's horror anthology specifically, because he knew that it was something I was passionate about, and I think he wanted to spotlight like more diverse creators. But to me, I'm sure a women's horror anthology would be great, and I'm sure there are people out there who could do a great job with that. But to me, it was too kind of vague. And I've just had this lifelong love of monsters. Like I joke that I wanted to be a werewolf when I grew up, when I was a kid, which is not entirely inaccurate. But it just seemed to me like it was a little bit more focused, and it would be a little bit easier to curate that, because we could have a clearer idea in mind of what we wanted the book to look like and wanted the stories to look like. So I knew that I didn't want to work with, or I wanted to work with women and non-binary creators specifically, because that's something I'm passionate about, spotlighting, because I think that, again, we talk about mainstream comics and creators. It's so overwhelmingly white and male still, that trying to just give voice to a wider range of people. And, there are enough monster anthologies with men, and I'd be happy to recommend them to anyone.
Yeah,
I just wanted to do something a little bit different.
No one should give you any shit about that. Like, there are so many others out there that I'm sure were made up of like a whole, like you said, of a large portion of white dudes. Like, there are plenty of other monsters. If you're pissed that you didn't get in this one, relax. There'll be another one like next week.
Yeah, we had a couple, but for the most part, their response was pretty positive, which was good. But yeah, just again, I could see a lot of opportunity, and especially through the internet, where you can kind of join these more niche communities. I realized that there were a lot of other people like me who grew up loving monsters, and getting frustrated that for women the only roles in monster stories tended to be like the love interest or the victim or the sexy monster hunter. And sometimes there'd be like the one token girl monster, but she'd have to be a lot less monstrous than the boy ones.
Yeah, or it's Frankenstein's wife. Like, all right, like we got it.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was always exactly. So I like that was something that always frustrated me growing up, and seeing that there were so many other people that had this frustration. Again, and I'm focusing on women, but like non-binary monsters were like not a thing at all. So for other people, it was even worse, like even more of a desert. So I knew that there were people out there that would connect with this concept. And yeah, the response was immediately overwhelming. I did a bunch of promotion at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival in May, and we got over 200 pitches.
Wow.
For this anthology, like, which was bananas.
Did you like announce that ahead of time, or like how was that set up?
Yeah, so we technically opened the opportunity, like the pitch period, just before TCAF, and then it went on for a little over a month afterwards, so people would have time to kind of collect themselves. But we have a bunch of people in this anthology we've worked with on the Toronto Comics Anthology. Just it's easy to verify what a person can do. Like if someone pitches you a story, you can kind of imagine it in their style if you're familiar with their style. So we did end up hiring quite a number of people from Toronto that we had worked with before. But we also got pitches from all over the world. I don't know how word of the pitches got out there, because we were pretty much just disseminating info on Twitter. But social networking is amazing. Yeah. And we have someone in the book from Poland, and some folks from Malta, and some people from Brazil. So it somehow the word of the pitches got way out, which was really exciting.
Well, when it comes to something like that, like you're always going to have these up and coming creators that are on the hunt for anthology work and stuff like that, and then knowing that you have a niche request or theme for that, I think that probably helped spread the word out, because then it's like that old commercial, and they tell two friends and they tell two friends, because it's all going to spread out that way through that community. And what I found anyway, like for the most part, comics can be very inclusive with a lot of that stuff, and it's like it's what is it, a rising tide raises all shit. I butchered that saying, but it's
I know what you mean.
It's all good for everybody. Like it's not just like, oh well I don't want to tell this guy about that anthology because if he gets a spot, then I can't get a spot. Like no, it doesn't really work that way. So it's like they all kind of want to see everyone get those kind of opportunities, and especially if it's like this is something that's tailor-made. Like if you knew a female creator or a non-binary creator that is trying to work, like this is something that's tailor-made for you. Like like they should be encouraging their participation in the book.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely also places where they aggregate this kind of stuff, like calls for submissions. Yeah. So that kind of thing definitely really helped us. But even with that, to get over 200 people pitching stories, and then over 100 artists that applied as well, it was really heartwarming and overwhelming to see how immediately this concept connected with people, I guess. So it was really exciting. It's been a really exciting journey, and the Kickstarter also went really well. We almost doubled our goal.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which was amazing. So I hope people like the book. Basically, it's where I'm at now.
So how do you even begin to narrow down your selections? If you had over 200 submissions and you narrowed it down to just 25, like what is that kind of process like?
So M. Blankier and I had a look at the list of pitches, and we both kind of started narrowing down based on the ones that just were like the most exciting and fresh to us. Like one of the things is, because I love monsters and have been consuming that kind of media for my whole life, I have a really clear idea of what's out there and what's been done before. Mm-hmm. So if you're pitching me a variation on Ginger Snaps or something, it's not that it's a bad story, but like I've seen it before, So there was a degree of wanting stories that felt a little fresher, felt a little bit different. The stories that were using the monster metaphor in a way, again, that was interesting and different. But there were also things like making sure we had a variety of monsters so that it wasn't 12 werewolf stories or something, and making sure that we had a diversity of voices represented as well, and different like art styles even. So there was and like variety of tones and that kind of thing, because you want, as you say, like you want an anthology to be pretty broad and have something in there for everyone. And so we have a central organizing principle. Like we kind of knew what we were about, and we did narrow down what the idea of a monster would have to be. And we have a couple in here that are a little outside of that, but there were things like I didn't want to use any aliens. I didn't want to use any robots, just because once you start with that, it's your definition of monster is like a slippery slope.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it becomes too broad. So yeah, it was a lot of that kind of stuff. And we both had all of these different competing ideas in our heads. And then we were able to sort of narrow it down. And then from there it was saying, okay, we love these 3 mermaid stories, for example, but like which one is our favorite? Just so that, yeah, we'd have some variety and tonal variety and all those other things.
No, it's great. And you write a story in the anthology as well.
Yep. Yes.
So
about, shockingly, werewolves.
Hey, they're a subgenre or creature that has stood the test of time. So there's nothing wrong with werewolf stories. And I agree.
With the concept you're going with, I think that there's a lot of metaphor that can go in with werewolves, because there's like this, a part of it can be seen as like, you're not comfortable in your own skin, and it could certainly play with the idea that you're going with the overall anthology.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wasn't sure. I'm even spoiling my story by saying it's about werewolves, but anyone who knows me isn't. No, I said it. It's my fault. But yeah, it's I wanted something different with werewolves, and I also am like really into classic noir, specifically like Humphrey Bogart movies. So I just sort of had this image in my head of combining those two loves into one story, and I also wanted to do a revenge story, but that didn't require any women being like sexually assaulted or murdered. Yeah. So those were kind of all the things in my head that coalesced. And Emmanuelle Chateauneuf, I found out on Instagram, also a Humphrey Bogart fan. So I reached out to her, and it ended up being a really exciting and fulfilling project for both of us to work on. So I wasn't even sure I was going to pitch originally, because I was like, duh, I want to spotlight other creators, but I had this idea and I went, no, I need to do this.
Well, sometimes that, you have a story that's got to be told. So it's really,
yeah. And I'm the editor and I can do what I want.
Yeah, there you go. Did someone else run the Kickstarter? Like, no, like you got this. What?
Yeah.
You earned it. That's fine. What was the Kickstarter experience like? I know you said you almost doubled your goal. Like, that can be a harrowing campaign to run with any, even like a single issue. I mean, you're running an anthology series anthology comic and looking at a goal of you had $18,000 with your goal. So like that's usually a higher number than a lot of an indie comic would. But you clearly have some it looks like you know what you're doing and are able to budget correctly with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of that comes from Stephen Andrews, the publisher. This is our, I guess for him it's his 4th Kickstarter, I think. Mm-hmm. And for me it would be my 3rd. I didn't run the volumes. Wait, I've messed up my own math. Yes, no, 3rd. Because volumes 3, 4 of Toronto Comics I was involved in, but there it was more, I'd help reach out to media and I'd do the interviews and that kind of stuff. But with this one, yeah, like I was posting all the updates and I was coordinating with all of our incentive stuff. Mm-hmm. So like the enamel pin and the bookmarks and the prints and everything, like I controlled all of that. And like, yeah, all of that stuff. So like I definitely didn't do it alone, and Stephen Andrews was a huge help with that. So I definitely don't want to undersell his contributions there. But yeah, it was definitely my first where I was this involved with it, and it's pretty overwhelming. We realized that we did make some mistakes with the campaign in terms of like reward tiers and that kind of stuff, but thankfully nothing that tanked us, so that's good. But it's good. And yeah, I mean, it's just kind of keeping on top of it and not really having a social life for a month, because you're constantly like, we were getting messages from people who want to do like cross promotion and stuff like that. So it's kind of seeing, if their project makes sense to promote with our project, like if our audiences are similar enough.
And I'm sure you get a lot of like scammers and weird things that pop up too of things trying to like, oh well, we can increase your backers by this amount or some nonsense. Like they all seem to come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, we definitely did. But again, having done this so many times, it was a lot. We sort of knew what to expect, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
So like there wasn't anything that was too surprising other than that we hit our goal really fast. And we'd kind of floated a couple of ideas for stretch goals, but we hadn't really settled on anything.
Yeah.
And then we were like, oh, crud, we need something really fast. Which I maybe shouldn't be admitting, but like we had ideas. It just wasn't sort of set in stone yet. So, but that's a pretty good problem to have.
Yeah, really.
That the goal was hit too fast.
Oh, man,
so that's fine. We course corrected, I think. So, but yeah, no, overall it was a really good experience. It's, stressful just being what it is, but I think it went pretty well, all things considered. So I'd do it again.
Well, is there anything you would do differently if you've done it you've done Kickstarter campaigns for a couple of times, but is there anything you would have done differently that you're like, no, like if only someone had told me this before I hit, launch campaign?
Yeah, I would have probably figured out some of the stretch goal stuff sooner and had assets for it, because like we figured once we got close that we could sort of set that stuff up, and we didn't want to commission art, for example, if we weren't sure we would need it. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think I would just eat the cost and do that sooner in advance. And then just triple check. Maybe trying, this wasn't deliberate, but we ended up having to kind of build the campaign in the middle of the night, which I maybe wouldn't do again, because I definitely made some, there was one of the tiers we forgot to put in the like correct shipping amount. Ooh. So I mean, it's okay, it's the kind of thing that's not going to kill us, but stuff like that. So if anyone out there is trying doing Kickstarters, it could. In this case, it's fine.
It could be really scary. Like that's like I immediately like my heart sank when you're like we didn't calculate postage. I'm like, oh god, like because that can add up so quickly, and then you just ruin everything.
Yeah, thankfully it was for one of the limited tiers, and I think it's a difference of like $3, so it's fine. But I would say anyone who's if for folks who are thinking about doing Kickstarters, yes, definitely make a plan for postage and stuff, because as you say, that stuff can totally kill you. Yeah. But we also have experienced that with former campaigns, so we kind of knew what to expect and to be really, really careful with everything. It was just, there was one of the tiers where we didn't calculate, I think, international or American shipping or something like that, but it'll be okay.
Now, when creators were submitting pitches for the anthology, were they coming like with a team already, or were you kind of like pairing people up, saying like, oh, this writer would be really good for this artist, and stuff like that?
We had a mix. So some people did come paired. So as I said, I reached out to Emmanuel in advance. So when M blank here also has a story in the collection, and we both like formally pitched because we were like, we have to go through the process too. We're going to be fair about this. So like I came with Emmanuel as my artist, but M didn't have an artist in mind. Excuse me. So for her as an example, she just pitched the story, and then we went through artist submissions, and given the tone of hers, I decided Helen Robinson had a few pieces in her portfolio that were kind of gothic feeling already, and she used color in like a really emotive, expressive way that I thought would be really effective for the Low Tide story, which I believe you've read. Yeah. And it just seemed like a really good fit. So we also did that kind of thing where we would have a story with no artist. And in the Toronto Comics thing before, we have there's like a system where artists and writers can kind of pair themselves up based on stories that they think they'd be good at illustrating. But with this, it was just too overwhelming. So I think we had 7 scripts without artists. And again, when you're looking at a pool of over 100, it was just too much. So we just went through and sort of decided whose art we thought would match well with the story that we liked, and kind of went from there. But it took a long time of going through over 100 portfolios and trying to make a match based on that.
Yeah, well, at least I mean, it's also again a good problem to have if you have all of these people that are like, yeah, I want to be a part of this. So if you come to them and say like, oh well, hey, here's a a script or someone you should meet, I think you would work well together. You're like matchmaking in that case.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean that's part of editing in other forms of comics as well, is just sort of figuring out whose art style is going to match the tone of the book that you're making. So it wasn't completely new to me, but yeah, it was a long process, but it was an exciting one, and getting to imagine what the story would look like with different styles, and then trying to decide whose seemed to fit best.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite monster? Not necessarily one that's in the book, or even a werewolf, which I know you have a story about, but as a whole, if you're like, your go-to.
So in terms of like general monsters, like archetypal monsters, werewolves are my favorite. I've thought they were the coolest since I was a kid, and I can analyze.
You wanted to be one when you grew up. I mean, there's still time.
Yeah,
you can still.
I'm still working on it, but it's been maybe that'll be by the time I reach 30. But no, there's something like I find it seems like it's difficult for people to come up with new things to do with them, which is I feel why they're sort of underestimated. Because I feel like a lot of the stories sort of retread the same ideas, but I think that they are really ripe for metaphor. I think that as a kid they were like, especially as a little girl, I think they were sort of aspirational, and that they were all the things that I like wasn't supposed to be, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like they were really big, and they were really powerful, and they were really scary, and all these kinds of things. And I was this like dorky, awkward little kid. So I don't know. I think that was appealing to me. And they were, they just seemed really cool. But in terms of like more specifics, I'm also an enormous fan of Frankenstein. So in terms of more specific texts, I guess, I'm also a huge fan of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, and all of the sundry adaptations of that story, because I think that even after 200 years, we still keep coming back to it, and there's something about it that's still so engaging and so relevant that I just find fascinating.
There were two comics that I can think of right off the top of my head that were published like 2 months ago that dealt with updates to the Frankenstein story. So it's like there's still Made Men by Paul Tobin and what's his artist, Arjun, blanking on the last name of the artist, and then Victor Duvall wrote a book for Boom called Destroyer that was also an update on it. And it's like, like there's something about that, the Frankenstein mythos. And although the only thing I hate about it is that like you get the assholes that are going to be like, well, the monster's not named Frankenstein. I know, but you know how annoying it is to have to write Frankenstein's monster over and over again when you're having to talk about a book like that. Like, so just maybe call him Frank, or give him a name like Jeff,
Frankie.
Anything. Yeah.
Yeah, Adam is popular.
Yeah.
But no, I'm totally with you. I mean, if you think about it, it's a story about progeny, so there's no reason that the monster can't be Frankenstein if he's Victor's son.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's fine. I call the monster Frankenstein on the regular. Yeah. But there's so many different thematic threads that you can take from that novel. I think it gets reduced a lot of the time now to being about, hubris and not transgressing the will of God or nature or whatever. But I think there's a lot more to it. And I think, the fact that we keep revisiting it is testament to that. So that's a novel that I'm also just obsessed with. So,
well,
you're asking me what I'm reading right now. I'm reading a bunch of books about Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. Yes.
So look, that's it's saying something about that it's like it's still so interesting after all these years. Like, you don't get that for everything,
Mm-hmm. There's a reason we keep going back to that well, and that it's become like it's sort of transcended being one text, and it's now like a cultural myth, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. Now, do you said you've always been a big horror person? Do you remember like your kind of gateway drug into the horror genre?
I always have to blame The Nightmare Before Christmas. I saw it when I was probably around 3, maybe 4. And instead of being terrified, I was completely enamored with it. Yeah, I was a lot more easily frightened when I was young. So like, I wasn't one of those kids who was, 9 and watching The Ring or anything like that. But I liked a lot of, horror flavored, children's programming and things like the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books.
Yes.
Still haunt my nightmares. So yeah, a lot of that stuff was big for me when I was a kid, and but I think I can trace it back to Nightmare Before Christmas. It's certainly the earliest one I can remember. And it was, like the designs are still so good.
Yeah, my wife and I went back and forth about showing it to my 4.5-year-old because they were like, I don't know, like, what do you think about this? Like, and he was like all for it. He's like, no, I'm gonna watch this. Like, I'm like, what? It could be scary. And he's like, I'm gonna watch the whole thing. And like, he was fine. He loved it. He was, the whole thing still holds up. It's still really well done, and the designs are like, he's gotten really into monsters, so it's like, this is really cool. It's a great way to kind of like expose them to that without freaking them out too much.
Yeah, I know. I definitely have friends who saw that and were scared by it when they were really young, but I just I loved the music and I loved the designs and I loved the characters, and as an adult looking back at it, it's such a bizarre story really, because it's about a dude having a midlife crisis and your protagonist is kind of your villain for the first part of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and for a large large part of the movie. And in the book, actually, there's no Oogie Boogie, so Jack is both protagonist and antagonist, which is so strange for a children's book, I think. And I don't know.
I didn't even realize it was based on a book.
Yeah, it's a little storybook that Burton made before the movie. So you see a lot of the designs. It's a really simple down story. Like, it doesn't really, all the tertiary characters aren't really a thing. It's just about Jack and then Santa scolding him at the end. But it is based on a book. I went to Disneyland a few years ago and I got it there after going to the Haunted Mansion that they dress up like Nightmare Before Christmas. It was a big moment in my life when the big animatronic Jack leans into your doom buggy. And my name is actually on his list in the movie. He looks at his list when he's in the sleigh, and my name is on the list, spelled correctly and everything. Wow. So, yeah, I guess it was just meant to be.
There you go. Yeah, really.
But yeah, I have always loved that story, and I'm glad that your son was into it too.
Now, do you fall on that it's a Halloween movie or a Christmas movie, or is it just like a little bit of both?
It's an all the time movie for me.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, I do. See, I have memories of watching it on both Halloween and Christmas. I feel like the vibe of it is a little more Halloween, like the design of it, like the very kind of like expressionist Tim Burton-y aesthetic of it feels a lot more Halloween to me. Because even the Christmas parts are a little, like, other than when he first finds Christmas Town, a lot of it is still this very like washed out palette. Like, it doesn't have that same vibrance that I associate with Christmas movies. So for me, I guess I would say a little bit more Halloween, because I would rather watch like The Grinch.
Yeah.
On which Boris Karloff, so still has a horror connection. That's more Christmas to me. So yeah, I think, and just, it's a little bit, it's not as saccharine, I guess, as a lot of Christmas stuff.
Yeah.
Even its ending, which is like sweet, I don't think it's as like sappy.
No.
Which I don't mean as a bad thing.
No,
I associate that with Christmas.
Yeah.
Like this,
there's a place for that. It's not like, and we all learned a valuable lesson and we're all together for the holidays. Like, no, it's darker for what they have going on there.
Yeah, like Jack kills Oogie Boogie and then is scolded and then the movie ends, It's so that fits in my mind a little bit more with Halloween, but I watch it at any time of the year when the mood strikes.
That's a good answer. So when can people actually pick up if they miss the Kickstarter for Wayward Sisters, bouncing back to that book, because that's one of the main reasons we're talking.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Yep.
When if they miss the Kickstarter, where can people go to actually order the book?
So you can go to waywardsistersanthology.com and pre-order it. Right now, we're laying the book out for print, so really close to sending it off to the printers, which means we should get the books in January. We'll probably have some like launch events here in Toronto if we have listeners in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it'll be available on our website as pretty much as soon as the books arrive and are printed, so you can get them that way. And yeah, that's probably the easiest. You can also follow us on Twitter and stuff. On both Twitter and Instagram, we're at WS Anthology, and we're Wayward Sisters Anthology on Facebook and Tumblr. So you can follow up for updates as well.
Great. And then what about you? Is there anything else we could plug for you, or places people can go to connect with you online?
Yeah, Twitter is probably easiest. I'm Allison M. O'Toole, so that's Allison M as in Margaret, Otoole. That is where I tweet about comics, but right now mostly monsters.
Yeah.
And stuff. It'll always come back to that because
That's
that's what I always want to talk about.
But it sounds like if you're working on future anthologies and stuff, you'll probably be sharing information about that there. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, anything I'm working on, I'll talk about there. More on the like anthology kind of self-publishing stuff, but yeah, I talk about all that stuff there, and also yeah, whatever I'm watching and reading and stuff. So come say hi.
And monsters.
And monsters. Always monsters. And as I said, Frankenstein, so you can like expect random tweets about romantic poets and stuff like that as well. It's my hashtag brand. A lot of tweets about The Shape of Water when that first came out. I was understandably very excited about that one.
I haven't seen that yet. I really have to. I'm behind.
It's
tough.
quite lovely.
Yeah?
It's a very it's a nice little fairy tale. I really enjoyed it, and the Fishman design is beautiful. Like the effects people did a great job on that. It's that part's really, really beautiful. But yeah, it's a really sweet movie that pushed a lot of like really nice buttons for me. I really enjoyed it.
Have you ever heard of the graphic novel Dear Creature?
I've read Dear Creature.
It's Jonathan Case, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This one's a little bit more. That one has a bit of a satirical bite to it at times that Shape of Water doesn't have, but definitely explores a lot of the same territory.
Okay.
But I think you're also in a different. I was very charmed by the what's his name in Dear Creature? I don't remember.
The sea monster kid?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
It's like monosyllabic.
Yeah, that was one of the first comics I reviewed. So like it sticks out in my head about like, oh yeah, Dear Creature. Like so it just popped out.
Yeah, there's a little bit of similarity, but yeah, that one like there's a little more cynicism to it where and it's like still a very, very sweet comic, and I love like all the Shakespeare referencing and everything, but Shape of Water is like wears its heart on its sleeve a little bit more. Like it doesn't have as much like of a negative bone in its body, really. It's got like there's like one or two moments that are a little nastier, and then Guillermo's always a little bit I should say Del Toro is a little bit violent sometimes. I don't know. My friends and I refer to him by his first name as though we know him personally, which none of us do.
You guys go way back.
Yeah, we're like big, like it's been, as you can imagine, a big source of conversation. Also in Toronto, we've had the exhibit on. There's like an exhibit of his bunch of like movie props and art pieces that he owns.
That's awesome. So
he's been a very popular topic of conversation and here in Toronto and among like arty people for the past few months. But yeah, and The Shape of Water actually was filmed in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
So
it all comes together.
Yeah, a lot of connection there for us right now. But yeah, his movies will have violence in them, but yeah, like as they always are, like it's very genuine and very earnest, in a way that's like really sweet and really endearing.
Yeah, he handles monsters very well. Like he gives them some humanity that like makes you care about the monster instead of just like, well, here's some crazy thing that's gonna terrorize everybody. Like I remember that with his Hellboy movies, especially.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I have complicated feelings about his Hellboy movies, but that's a conversation for another time.
Well, speaking just of the monsters there, but
definitely, yeah, no, he definitely has a lot of affection that, again, I find very relatable. Looking for humanity in monsters and that kind of thing. It's definitely something I've always really connected with in his work.
Well, great, Allison. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This was a lot of fun. Always happy to talk monsters with people. So
yeah, me too. Hit me up on Twitter. You want to talk about any kind of monster? I'm there. That's what I'm about.
Cool. So Wayward Sisters, again, waywardsisters.com is the best place to check out and pre-order the book now, but it sounds like it'll be available.
Wayward Sisters anthology.
Anthology.com. And best place to check that out. But otherwise, yeah, it sounds like it'll be available pretty soon. So get your pre-orders.
Yeah,
in.
within like probably within 2 months, definitely. But maybe sooner than that. Yeah.
Great. All right. So that wraps it up then for this episode of Funny Book Splatter. I have been James Ferguson with my guest Allison O'Toole.
You've been listening to Funny Book Splatter, a horror comics podcast brought to you by HorrorTalk.com. We've been bringing you the best in horror since 2002. In addition to comics, we cover movies, TV shows, books, and video games. We've got news, reviews, guest features, interviews, unboxing videos, and much more. Be sure to sign up to Steve's Deals newsletter to increase your horror collection without breaking the bank. Check us out at HorrorTalk.com and at HorrorTalk on Twitter.